Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this special webinar, More Than Shelter, the Effects of Rental Eviction Moratoria on Household Wellbeing, featuring some recently released research by the UCLA Ziman Center for Real Estate. My name is Tim Kawahara, and I am the Executive Director of the Ziman Center. This program is part of our Housing, Neighborhood, and Health series through the Levine Program in Housing and Social Responsibility. This is last in a series of 3 programs focused on COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on housing and health-related outcomes. The research we are showcasing today was co-authored by Zhudong Ong at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, Stuart Gabriel, Distinguished Professor of Finance and Art and Realty Chair at the UCLA Anderson School of Management and Faculty Director of the Ziman Center, and Nitzan Sur-Ilan from Northwestern University and the Bank of Israel. This new research investigates the impact of the 2020 COVID-19 rental eviction moratoria on household well-being. Analysis of new data on eviction moratoria indicates those policies reduced evictions and resulted in the redirection of scarce household financial resources to immediate consumption needs, notably food and grocery spending. It's particularly timely that we're having this conversation just the day after a federal judge struck down the CDC's moratorium on evictions. You may have seen that in the news yesterday. We will have some time for questions at the end, so please use the Q&A function to submit questions as you have them. Presenting today is co-author Nitzan Sur-Ilan. She is a research fellow of the Ziman Center's UCLA Gilbert Program in Real Estate, Finance, and Urban Economics, is a postdoctoral fellow at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. Her research interests include household finance, real estate, and financial regulation. Nitzan has a PhD in finance, an MBA in finance, and a BA in economics, all from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And with that, I'd like to turn the program over to Nitzan.
Thank you, Tim, for this nice introduction. This paper is co-authored, as Tim mentioned, with Zhudong Ong and Stuart Gabriel about the effect of eviction moratoria on household well-being. And before I start, I just want to highlight that this paper got research funding from the Ziman Center, Arthur and Rosalind Gilbert for Finance Urban Economics program. Thank you very much. So the motivation for this paper. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused millions of households in the US to be unable to pay rent and placing them at risk for eviction. And this risk of eviction increased especially among people of color and low-income households. And in order to ensure shelter of those households and to lower the virus spread, many state and local governments implemented eviction moratoria. And this paper applies new data set on state and local geographical COVID-19 rental eviction moratoria in order to assess the effect of this policy on household well-being. Some background for this paper. In March 2020, the share of constrained renters, those that are paying more than half of their income on rent, jumped to 1/2 of all renter households. And in general, even before the pandemic, those renters have, on average, net amount of only $5,000 US. So you can imagine that COVID-related employment shocks can have a huge impact on those renters. Therefore, during March 2020, almost 40 states, including California, Florida, Texas, and New York, implemented eviction moratoria. And eviction moratoria and other rental policies that were implemented on the same time might have provided households with financial and mental relief in the form of positive shocks to liquidity. And renters that are benefiting from such policies could redirect their resources to consumption needs, especially food consumption, and therefore lower their food insecurity and ease the mental stress. Our paper is part of a large literature that discusses the effect of rental policies, such as rent control, but for the best of our knowledge, eviction moratoria, this is the first time that we have experience with a national eviction moratoria during COVID-19 pandemic. Stuart Gabriel and co-authors provide evidence on the effect of California 2000 financial crisis foreclosure moratoria on housing in local economies, but this paper is about eviction moratoria on renters. We already know that eviction have large negative effects on employment, homelessness, health, and future housing stability. So not just short-term effect, but also long-term negative effects. And those negative effects are especially among people of color and minorities. And therefore, it is very important to understand the effect of eviction moratoria on minorities. And this is what we do in the paper. Our paper is also related to a large literature that examines the effect of COVID-19 pandemic on the economy. So what we do in this paper, we use new panel data on eviction moratoria to study the causal impact of eviction moratoria on household spending and well-being. And we are using two different data sets that show that eviction moratoria increase household spending, especially food spending, and therefore lower food insecurity and ease mental distress, especially among African American households. Eviction is a very complicated process. It includes 5 phases. The first one is landlord gives the tenant an eviction notice, and then there is the eviction filing, and then the court holds a hearing to receive evidence, and then the court issues a ruling, and then there is the phase of the enforcement of the court order, where usually the sheriff needs to evict the tenant. And the reason why I'm highlighting this here is that there are other papers that discuss the effect of eviction moratoria, especially those by Emily Benfer and co-authors, and they are giving different weights to different stages in the eviction process. In our paper, eviction moratoria means eviction prevention measures for one or more of those 5 stages. So we give equal weights to each phase of the eviction process. Many states and counties in the US implemented eviction moratoria in different time. So how we collected the data? Let's start with the state eviction moratoria. In the case of the state eviction moratoria, we use text analysis in order to collect information on state eviction moratoria from different websites, from the state level governor, court, and legislation websites for all states in the US. This was pretty simple, but then we found out that not just states implemented eviction moratoria, but also counties, different counties in the US implemented eviction moratoria. For county level analysis, we use Eviction Lab dataset. Eviction Lab is part of Princeton University, and they have a large dataset of eviction filing, historical dataset of eviction filings, but since the pandemic started, Eviction Lab also collected information on eviction moratoria and other rental policies across the US in different counties, cities, districts, and states in the US. They have many arrays. We have only 2 wonderful arrays. So we use their information in order to, for county level analysis. I just want to mention here that for states, we compare our data set to their data set in order to see if there are gaps in the data set, but we found exact match between our state level analysis to their state level analysis. We limit our study period to between March to August 2020. The reason for that is that since September, there is a national CDC order that prevents evictions all over the US. Actually, until today, it's supposed to end around June 2021. So the only time that we have variation across states and counties across time in the US is between March to August 2020, and this is why we only focus on this period of time. We created websites of maps of rental policies. And let me show the website for a second. So I'll stop share and share again the websites. And we start, Christina, please let me know if there are any issues. We start with state level maps. You can see here the time. We start the maps from March until August. And what you can see in light red is the eviction, only eviction moratoria in different states. And in red, you can see eviction moratoria and other rental policy. Other rental policies means three different groups of rental policies. The first one is cap on rent increase. The second one is credit checks, which means that the landlord cannot report the credit bureau of evicted tenant. And utility disconnection refers to that you cannot disconnect utilities of the renter. So overall, what we can see that when we start in March, almost no state had eviction moratoria in place. But as we move closer to the middle of the pandemic, more and more states implemented eviction moratoria. And we can see clearly here the variation across time and across state. In the middle of the pandemic, around June, almost all states had eviction moratoria in place. So again, now it's in March, and we can see that more and more states are implementing eviction moratoria. The second thing that I want to highlight here is that although there are some states that are colored here in red, which means that they are implementing more than one rental policy, almost all states had a eviction moratoria in place, while other rental policies are only few in a specific states. Now I'm going to move to state and county information. Again, the county level information is from Eviction Lab, and we don't have information for all counties. We have only information for specific counties. The red color is the same as the previous map. The blue color means county eviction moratoria. Light blue means only county eviction moratoria. And blue means county eviction moratoria and other rental policies. The interesting thing in the case of county level policy is that we can clearly see here that there are some counties in specific states that add eviction moratoria on top of a state eviction moratoria. So you can see that there are some counties that implement an eviction moratoria on top of a state eviction moratoria. And we were highly interested, why is that? So we talked with some people and some governors, and the common answer that we received is that county regulators were worried that the state will hand the eviction moratoria in a short period of time. And therefore, they wanted to assure their households that shelter in place and that eviction moratoria can last more than a state eviction moratoria. But in our paper, we will try to identify the effect of a county level policy on top of a state level policy. Okay, so I'll go back to my presentation now. In terms of the data, we use 4 different data sets. The first data set is from the Federal Reserve. The Fed used this data set in order to produce its stress test. The Fed data set contains 50 billion records of 500 million credit card accounts, which includes detailed information on borrowers' credit card purchases, payment, credit score, and other borrower characteristics. The second data set includes data from Opportunity Insight, from Chetty et al. Information. They collected information, aggregated and anonymized information on credit and debit card spending by category of spending collected by Affinity Solution. The nice thing is that they made this publicly available data. So why we are using two data sets that includes data on spending? Because Opportunity Insight provide us information on consumption by categories. And we were highly interested in the change in consumption, especially food consumption, food spending. So therefore, we use information from Opportunity Insight as well. The third data set is from a COVID-19 household pulse survey of the census survey. This is a very nice survey that collected information on a weekly basis for 10 weeks, starting April 23rd, on food insecurity and mental health. This survey actually had 3 different phases. We are only using the first one because the second phase started in September, and because our data set ends in August, we only use the first phase. So 10 weeks with information on food insecurity and mental health disorders during the pandemic. The fourth data set is from Google Trends. So we wanted to know more information, real-time indicators of food insecurity. We were concerned that the census data set had a small amount of observations, and we wanted to know more real data information. So therefore, we use Google Trend data. The nice thing about Google Trends is that it gives you popular terms and more common terms to the specific term that you're looking for. So if, for instance, we looked for food insecurity, help with food, the Google Trend will give you similar terms, will help you to find out what are the best terms that you can search for. Our methods. So we started with a panel model with fixed effect. Again, our outcomes here are by zip code or by county or by state, a time t. And we compare between states that had eviction moratoria in place in a specific week to states that did not, where we control for unemployment rate and house price appreciation, and with time and geographical fixed effect. So we control for time and state or county fixed effect, but also for things that are changing across time and across state or counties. This is in order to control for other things that happen at the same time. We're aware that it's a very complicated period of time, so we try to control for a lot of things that occurred in the same time in order to better assess the effect of eviction moratoria on our outcome variables. So this is our basic model. The second model that we are using is treatment intensity difference in difference. We were aware that eviction moratoria was target for a specific population, specifically groups, areas with higher share of renters and higher share of unemployment. And therefore, we use this group, we call it here R, the treatment intensity indicator, that it is based on a local renter share in a specific area and unemployment rate as a proxy for the share of people with financial distress. And the beta here is the lower bound estimated of the treatment effect. Again, we control for time and location fixed effect, and again for employment, house price appreciation as well. The first step is to see if eviction moratoria was actually effective if it lowered the number of eviction filings. So what we did in the first step is to look for information on eviction filings. As mentioned, Eviction Lab has great historical data on eviction filings. The thing is that since the pandemic started, it was very challenging to collect information on eviction filings. In the website, they have information on 27 US cities that includes information on eviction filings. So we use this information. We hope that in the near future they can collect more information on eviction filings, so we will have much larger amount of observation with more robust results. In order to identify the effect of eviction moratoria, we differ between state eviction moratoria and county eviction moratoria. As mentioned before, states and counties implement an eviction moratoria in the same time. So to differ between a state and a county eviction moratoria, in the first analysis, we only look at state eviction moratoria where no county implemented eviction moratoria. So the only variation is between state eviction moratoria. The second estimation will be to look at all states that had eviction moratoria in place and to differ between counties that had eviction moratoria to counties did not. So the only variation will be between counties on top of a state eviction moratoria. I hope that it's clear. If not, I will explain it in the next few slides again. So let's start with the county eviction filing. We can see from the results here that 1 week of a state eviction moratoria lowered the amount of eviction filings by 130. And this is compared to eviction filing, the average amount of eviction filings weekly in the pandemic period is 125. And there is a large variation across time. So we can say that a state eviction moratoria lowered the amount of eviction filings to almost 0. If we look at the target group again is those rent areas with higher share of renters, higher share of unemployment. We can see again a decline in the amount of eviction filing, around 85 filings for a week of eviction moratoria. So this is for state eviction moratoria with no county eviction moratoria in order to differ between state and county eviction moratoria. Columns 3 and 4 are for county eviction moratoria. So again, columns 3 and 4 include states that had eviction moratoria in place, and the only variation is between counties that had this policy to counties that did not. We can see smaller effect for county level policy than state level policy, and when we only focus on the target group, we see no significant effect of county level policy on top of a state level policy. We will see similar results in the other outcome variables. What about the effect on spending? So we saw a direct effect of eviction moratoria on eviction filing. What about spending? Here we use information from the Federal Reserve data on spending, payment, debt payment, and credit score change. So a state eviction moratoria, here it's monthly. 1 month of a state eviction moratoria increased spending by around 1.9%. If we only focus on the target group, we receive 1.4%. And this is after controlling for zip code fixed effect, month fixed effect, changes in unemployment, and in house price appreciation. So controlling for things that change across time, across zip codes, and across time and zip codes together with unemployment and house price appreciation. What about changes in payment? Here we only find significant effect among the target group, which makes sense because those are the group that this policy was targeted for. And what about credit score? There are papers that show that eviction can clearly affect credit score of tenants. So we can see that in areas where there is larger share of renters and larger share of unemployment, the effect of state eviction moratoria is positive, increased credit bureau credit score compared to areas with no eviction moratoria. So overall, a 12-month eviction moratoria is associated with 16 or 14% increase in credit card spending and payment. And to put it into perspective, because we are talking about the start middle of the pandemic, the average year-on-year decline in spending in April 2020 is 25%, and it in the 75 percentile is almost decline of 40% in consumption. So we are talking about a large effect compared to the overall effect of the pandemic on consumption. We see a larger effect for the target group. The effect on credit score is smaller than on consumption on debt payment, but it's still significant. 12-month eviction moratoria results in 4-point increase in credit score. The results are also robust, to including real income as an additional control, and we estimated all models. The results are in the paper. And we find insignificant effect of county-level eviction moratoria when there is already state-level eviction moratoria in place. So as showed before, here are the same results from the table before, but because instead of state-level policy, here is a county-level policy. And we have here only states that had a policy in place where the only variation is between county. And you can see here that county-level policy on top of a state-level policy, we don't see any significant effect of county-level policy on spending, debt payment, and credit score of borrowers, tenants. We also use opportunity insight data to examine the effect of eviction moratoria on spending. So the interesting thing here is that we are using different data sets, opportunity insight compared to the Fed data set, and we received very similar results. State-level policy, we find that a state eviction moratoria increased consumption by around 1.2% compared to 1.6% in the Fed data set. Again, very large effect among the target group, and almost zero effect for county-level policy on top of a state-level policy. An additional week of a state eviction moratoria in the case of opportunity insight data is associated with increase of 1.2% and among the target group of 1.7%, and no effect for county, no significant effect for county level policy. The nice thing about opportunity insight is that we can use their information to differ between different types of consumption spending. And we find that the 1 week of eviction moratoria is associated with 1% increase in food spending, 1.4% increase in retail spending, and 1.4% increase in spending on non-durable products. So here are the results. Eviction moratoria, 1 week of eviction moratoria is associated with an increase of 1% on food spending, around 1% on retail with grocery, 1.4% retail without grocery, and larger effect on non-durable products, 1.4%, and negative but not significant effect on durable goods. This while controlling for house price appreciation, unemployment rate, county fixed effect, and week fixed effect. We were concerned that the census survey is not strong enough results because of lack of number of observations. So we use also Google Trend information. Okay, I'm sorry about that. The effect of eviction moratoria on food insecurity. Yeah, I was confused for a second. Excuse me. Okay, so we saw that eviction moratoria increase spending, and specifically food spending. So because we were interested in the effect of eviction moratoria on food insecurity, we use household poll survey data from April 23rd to July 21. In this survey, households declared that in the past 7 days, they sometimes do not have enough food to eat or often do not have enough food to eat. And we find that an additional week of eviction moratoria is associated with a decline of 2% in the number of African American households that declare as food insecure. So here are the results. As mentioned, the survey is, we only use the first phase of the survey, so we have 10 weeks. It's state level information, so we don't have a lot of observation, and we think that this is the reason why we're not getting a significant effect, but we do receive a significant effect for Black. And we already know that eviction affect community of color more than others. So eviction moratoria can affect food insecurity among Black more than others. And this is the results that we find. Again, this is a survey and it's only for 10 weeks, but we think that a significant effect among Black is a very strong result. We thought about the problems in the survey, so we used Google Trend in order to receive real-time information on food insecurity. We find that an additional week of eviction moratoria reduced Google search query for food stamps by 3.4, relative to an average for this specific term, the amount of search of 40.5 between March to August 2020. We also find that an additional week of state eviction moratoria reduced the amount of Google search of food banks near me by 5.1 relative to 20.5 on average. We know from the start of the pandemic that there are many people that search for food banks, so this is a very positive effect of eviction moratoria. Here are the results. You can see that there are 4 different search terms. As mentioned, the nice thing about Google Trend is that it gives you similar search terms. So although we started with help with food, Google search trend gives us a number of similar search terms. And you can see that state eviction moratoria had a significant effect on food stamps and food banks near me. And the mechanism is that food eviction moratoria increase spending, specifically food spending, which reduce food insecurity among affected households. What about mental health? So yeah, this is the end of my presentation because I see that my time is running out. Okay, so according to the census survey, 4 in 10 adults reported symptoms of anxiety or depression during COVID-19 pandemic, compared to 1 in 10 adults prior to that. So we are talking about a huge effect of the pandemic on mental health disorders. And fear of eviction can contribute to increase mental health. And there are some papers that already show that eviction affect mental health disorders. So we argue that eviction moratoria can ease stress and other mental health. We use, again, the census survey. The census survey asked households if they felt in the last few days nervous, anxious, or on edge, if they were not being able to stop or control worrying, or if they felt down, depressed, hopeless for more than half of the days or nearly every day. We find that additional week of eviction moratoria is associated with a decline of 1.9% in the share of African American households who reported feeling anxious. We also find a reduction by 1.6 in the share of African American households who reported feeling down, and reduction of 1% in the share of households that declare they cannot stop worrying, compared to an average increase of 24% during the pandemic. Here are the results, similar specification as before. The 3 first columns are feeling anxious. After that, it's can't stop worrying, and then feeling down. among Hispanic and among Black households for each of the three questions. We can see that a state eviction moratoria, 1 week of state eviction moratoria, lower the amount of people that are feeling actions about, among Black by 1.9%. Can't stop worrying for overall households by 1%, and feeling down among the Black by 1.6%. To conclude, this paper applies new panel data from the pandemic period to test the effect of rental eviction moratoria on measures of household well-being. We find that eviction moratoria increase spending, specifically food spending, especially among the target group, those renters, areas with higher share of renters, higher share of unemployment. We also find that the increase on food spending caused a decline in the amount of people that felt food insecure and is mental health especially among African American households. Before I end, I just want to mention that our paper is only partly equilibrium. There are many other effects of eviction moratoria, and this paper does not discuss the cost of this policy. Moody's estimates that around $70 billion is the amount of outstanding rent debt that owned by landlords at the end of 2020. And because we are almost at the mid of 2021, this amount is probably much higher. Against that, the University of Arizona estimates that the expiration of eviction moratoria could lead to emergency shelter, medical and foster care, and other costs of evictions that can range between $60 to $130 billion. There are already a number of states that pass legislation that gives funding to landlords. California is one example, but there are other states. Biden administration already declared that they're planning to give around $50 billion to different states in order to support rent relief and to end the eviction moratoria that the CDC order is supposed to end around the end of June. So we argued that there should be ongoing efforts that are necessary to address shortfalls in rent and to keep families stably housed, especially those low-income families and minorities. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please reach out to me via email or others. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Nitzan. I guess I can start off with a question. I have brought this question up before in a previous panel, but you know, the eviction moratoria it's not rent forgiveness. They'll have to, you know, as you mentioned in your slide, there's a huge amount of debt that's been accumulated, and eventually the rent's going to need to be paid back. And so, are we simply just kicking the can down the road here, or are there going to need to be some serious public policy interventions to be able to address that? Or, you know, where we're really, you know, I think the average American has something like $7,000 of back rent. And of course, it could be much more depending on the location, like if you're here in Los Angeles. So are we really going to face a cliff down the road?
Stuart, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer the question?
However you wish. Maybe Nitzan, I'll say a word or two. Firstly, thank you very much for a very fine presentation, and
indeed,
thank you, Tim, for your introduction. And I'd also like to call out Christina Green from the UCLA Ziman Center for Real Estate for her spectacular work and initiative as we look to this confluence of issues that relate to housing and health. So we're very, very pleased with this initiative and very grateful to Christina for the opportunity to present our work as part of this initiative. Tim, you speak to an issue of great concern, and Nitzan alluded to it and spoke to it as she was closing out the paper. And I think the answer to your question is, honestly, we don't know. I mean, I think we do know a couple of things, and that is that in the absence of the imposition of such rental eviction moratoria, we could have seen a flood of homelessness, and a flood of homelessness in honestly the worst period imaginable, a period in which we were told to shelter in place, as you know, in the context of a severe pandemic health storm. Now, what happens next? Well, if you read the article in the New York Times as of yesterday, what they say, and Tim, you alluded to this article, that there is potentially a confluence of positive factors that could be helpful here. One being, you know, the restart of the economy, the opening of the economy, but from a health and broader perspective. And if you saw the economic data today, you saw that unemployment claims are in the 400,000 range, very, very close to what they were pre-pandemic. So we're greatly relieved that unemployment claims have come down, that employment's moved back up, and we see an economy that's moving back to trend at a rate that's surprising relative to what we would have guessed a number of months ago. So that should help. It should also, as Nitzan and you have alluded to, the fact that not only is there significant funds for back rent contained in the federal American Rescue Act plan, but in some cases, as Nitzan has mentioned, in the case of the state of California, there's actual additional funds to augment the federal funds that have been budgeted and allocated by the state. Now that, of course, varies from state to state, et cetera. And beyond that, I'm not sure anybody knows. And there is a concern that you raised, Tim. We will see evictions. We may see many evictions. But the flip side of that is that we'll see many cases in which landlords and tenants will somehow work things out. There'll be some restructuring of debt, restructuring of rent, some payment plan, many informal plans that will be put into place. As you know, eviction, as Nitzan mentioned much earlier, is very difficult for the landlord and very unpleasant for the landlord, and of course, devastating for the tenant. So no one's, hopefully these processes are not going to be entered into lightly. And we're sure we're going to avert the worst. Will we avert all of this? Certainly not.
Nitzan, anything to add there?
Yeah, it's true that eviction moratoria is not rent forgiveness, and the Biden program, which gives $50 billion to rent relief, will include some income requirements that you will need to show that you were affected by the COVID and you have some low income, and this makes things much more difficult and makes the process much longer. And this is, if we want to compare this to the mortgage forbearance, for mortgage forbearance, there was no requirements. So anyone can apply for mortgage forbearance. And there is a very nice paper from itself from Stanford and co-authors that show that the ones that apply for mortgage forbearance are those with higher income. So I think that the fact that there are many requirements for Biden program will make it much harder to apply and to get this rent relief.
Excellent. I had a question too. I know that unemployment was one of your measures. Was there any consideration of underemployment? I think we know that a lot of these renters that are barely hanging on are cobbling together 2 and 3 and 4, minimum wage jobs to make their rent. Any consideration of underemployment in the study?
Stuart, do you want me to take this?
However you wish.
You can start and I can go after that.
Kim, that's an interesting question, and it's a question of kind of the robustness of results to the measure of unemployment that we use. The measure of unemployment that we used was a standard measure. It's a narrow measure of unemployment relative to the broader measure put out by the Bureau of the Census. And it's certainly possible that we could go back and, we estimate that intensity treatment model using a broader definition of unemployment. Not sure that it would make a huge difference in the sense that I would anticipate that the two are very highly correlated, the two measures. But Nitsan, please add.
So we know that it's a very complicated period of time to try to find a causal effect, and therefore we added time fixed effect and geographical localities fixed effect, and also major things that we thought that are changing across time and across different localities. So we have county fixed effect and time fixed effect, and we add the unemployment and income as a measure of things that change across time, across different locations. So I'm not sure if we will have much effect if we will have underemployment control, but we can check it.
Yeah. And another question about whether, and this may be beyond your scope, but maybe you have some thoughts about it, but whether you considered households that have school-age children. We know that a lot of mothers, particularly single mothers, had to give up their jobs to be home for schooling and things like that. But any thoughts about households with school-age children and the added pressure that puts on anxiety, depression, these other mental health issues?
I'll take a shot at this, and I'm sure that Nitsan has some thoughts as well. This was a difficult study to implement, as I think Nitsan alluded to, in light of the immediacy of the issue, in an effort to get something out in real time that would address the immediacy of what we call the policy treatment, the rental eviction moratoria. And owing to the fact that the data sets, as Nitsan said, are oftentimes very partial, survey-based, Google search query-based, et cetera, limited sample sizes, and limited cross-tabulations within those samples, so that to cross-tabulate some of our income terms by families with children or whatever, we seek what Nitsan presented was an effort to what we call in empirical research to isolate the treatment effect. In other words, to say something about the policy treatment, whether this policy of eviction moratoria affected spending, affected groceries, affected food insecurity, affected mental health, all things equal, whether we could, in a statistically rigorous format, make that statement. Beyond that, certainly the thought behind the question, it's highly plausible that there are other deeper and difficult issues that relate to both pandemic period, to families with children and with all the rest. And I'm just not sure if we could muster our data resources to get that much more deeper into it than we did. But Nitsan, please.
Yeah, actually, Tim, this is very in line with our research motivation. So we started this project and we wanted to know more information about the effect of eviction moratoria on household well-being. And part of that, because we already know that eviction affect more minorities, low-income households, people of color, single mothers, etc. And specifically, it affects on kids in the longer term. So we were highly interested in identify the effect on those groups. However, as Stuart mentioned, we had major issues with real-time data. It is very important to understand the effect of eviction moratoria, and we are now like 15 months after the start of the eviction moratoria process and the pandemic. And one of the reasons why we are presenting this paper as much as we can is in order to get some ideas where we can get better data, specifically on single mothers, education, minorities, etc. As mentioned, we only use information from a survey, the census survey, that had some information on household, but like add education, but because we only had 10 weeks of the survey, we don't have enough observation to identify the effect among specific group of education, etc. So again,
Tim?
if the audience had some information on data set that includes that, we will love to hear that. Thank you.
Tim, maybe I could just add a quick little comment as well. I'm not sure if time permits or if do we have time for me to add just one other piece?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so if you look at the motivation for the eviction moratoria that were imposed, be it federal, state, or local, it was really, at the time, it was shelter from the storm. We had a pandemic. It was a public health exigency. It was a public health emergency. And the public health leaders were telling us we needed to separate from one another. We needed to shelter in place. And the place in which to shelter, of course, was a dwelling unit. We were gravely concerned at the time about homeless populations and the spread of COVID amongst the homeless, but we were told to all go home, shut the doors, and don't come out until there's better information about COVID. Now, we did that, and we did that all over the world. The question that we asked in this paper, is it possible that this policy implemented largely because of public health exigency would have broader well-being impacts? And again, as Nitzan mentioned early on, there could be impacts that could be positive, there could be impacts that could be negative, there could be a range of impacts, and we only looked at a few of those. But it was our hypothesis, as Nitzan had mentioned, that when you look at the lack of financial resources, the terribly de minimis financial resources of the standard renter in this country, $5,000 in savings, period, that it's possible that if you are not only told that there's a moratoria on eviction, but told at the same time that you are allowed to defer your rent payment, that may, again, relieve a great deal of anxiety. It may allow you to relieve food insecurity at a time when food insecurity was soaring, and again, in a period where so many of these renters are frontline workers, and if you don't have a paycheck, you don't buy food. So it was kind of a simplistic thought process on our part, and it was very straightforward, but it was this question of whether we could identify any of those effects in the data. So that's a bit of a restatement, if you will.
Yeah, I appreciate that this is a very complex issue and that there are limitations on data sets and things. I guess we should probably thank Matthew Desmond and the Princeton Eviction Lab for some of the information that we actually do have now. Another question, you mentioned that obviously the moratoria helped spur spending on food and address food insecurity. The other expense that frequently is foregone when there are balance sheet issues in households are spending on healthcare. Was there any thought about, in addition to spending on food, spending on healthcare, personal healthcare issues?
So I'll take a shot at this, and Nitzan will probably correct me, but I'm not sure if that category of spending is included in the CHETI data. Is that right, Nitzan?
Yeah, I need to check again if we have this category, but yeah, I'm not sure if we have the healthcare. We only have spending by categories using CHETI information from Opportunity Insight, and healthcare is not part of the ones that are published on the website. so I can reach out and ask them directly.
I'd like to add one word to that that's sort of contextual. So two things were happening at this time that may be kind of confounding a healthcare impact. One is the fact that the hospitals were full of dying COVID patients, and healthcare was essentially being rationed, certainly at the hospital level. And the second is that there was a very well-known phenomenon at the time, which was a general phenomenon, which is nobody sought any kind of routine healthcare if it could be avoided. It was all deferred. So, you know, you're taking your kid for their routine 6-month checkup. I'm not sure if that was a, you know, kind of positive from a cost benefit perspective, when not to mention the fact that so many of the physicians and so much of the healthcare was via Zoom. And again, that's kind of hard to measure as well. So I think that, you know, taking it not as a normal period, but a period of just kind of shutdown and closure and emergency and all the rest, it would be very difficult to identify healthcare effects.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, there's a question in the Q&A function from Jay Tremblay, and certainly Stuart, you know, we work with a lot of private sector landlords. We know the developers and the private sector side. This question: are there plans by the center to examine costs of eviction moratoria on landlords, perhaps by sector, public, private, nonprofit?
Nitzan, you want to take that question, or maybe it was addressed to the center, or I don't know.
So you can start and I can.
You know, honestly, Tim, the individual asking the question is Jay, is that his name?
Yep.
Jay, you know, completely worthy question, completely appropriate question, completely sensible question. And we don't have definitive plans at this moment, although we ought to have such plans. And, you know, honestly, it's been a bit of a hectic period, even though it's been a COVID period. And maybe when Nitzan and I and our co-author Judong have a chance to sit down, we're going to be able to formulate something more structured along these lines. There's many chapters of this story to come. As we talked about earlier, the federal funds that are allocated, the state funds, the magnitude of the reimbursement, the fact that the reimbursement at best will be partial, and Tim's question of where do we go from there? What's the fallout from there? But nobody, Jay, is disputing the critical nature of the question that you raise and the fact that it's got to be worked through.
Yeah, I suspect that. Oh, go ahead, Nitzan.
Yeah, this is a very important question, and we try to think of how to connect our data on eviction moratoria to landlords, and specifically even landlords that applied for mortgage forbearance, and to examine the effect of eviction moratoria on landlords, and specifically landlords that apply for mortgage forbearance. But we have many data issues. I can tell you that every time that we are presenting this paper, we receive this question about the effect of eviction moratoria on homeowners and other effect of eviction moratoria. But as I explained today, we had so many difficulties in getting access to data. So if we add better data that connects the eviction moratoria to landlords, we certainly could do research about it. So maybe in the future, near future, we can get access to this kind of data, but not currently. Thank you.
Yeah, there's also the range of landlords too, right? So you have your corporate landlords, you have your mom and pop landlords, you have folks that are just using, you know, it's just passive income for them, and then, you know, maybe some folks who are seniors and this is the way they set up their retirement. So there's a whole different range there, and you know the complexity is enormous, as we've already recognized. So we're out of time, but I want to thank Nitzan and Stuart for the research and the presentation. Look forward to seeing everybody next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you to Nitzan.